of a crime. Not necessarily someone who's guilty, but someone who happens to be innocent, where it's extremely important. If you live in Delaware, Idaho, New York, North Dakota, Vermont, or West Virginia, you could be in a frightening position, as those states do not mandate the government preserve this key evidence needed for DNA testing. I was absolutely shocked that there are no rules, fast and firm rules to say you must preserve this evidence just in case. So I don't know what those states do with the evidence, whether they toss it or not, but they are under no ruling to keep it. 43 states have passed legislation that compels that evidence to be preserved upon the conviction of a defendant. Rules vary state to state in terms of a specific time frame, like how long you must keep the evidence, and also for which crimes. So some states are allowed to get rid of evidence between the conviction of a person and then a petition to retain the evidence, because then it makes way for more evidence that comes in. And many of these states cite storage space. We can't keep everything indefinitely. Biological or physical evidence is defined as skin, hair, tissue, bones, fingernail scrapings, teeth, blood, semen, or other body fluids. For a homicide, it is strongly suggested that the evidence be retained indefinitely. For a sexual assault, often evidence is retained to match the statute of limitations. But only 15 states out of 50 have a requirement that this evidence be properly stored. And that is a key word here, properly. So when we think of DERRICK's case, that the evidence became wet and moldy and they tossed it, that obviously wasn't properly stored. Then there are challenges, I hadn't thought about this, for what's called bulk evidence. So what if there's a mattress involved? What if there's a sofa involved or a huge piece of carpet? What do these states do with those large bulk pieces of evidence? And only 8 states have guidelines relative to this type of evidence. In an article in the West Virginia Law Review in May of 2018 that I read about the preservation of evidence, it stated that prior to DNA in post-conviction cases, destroying physical evidence in closed cases was standard practice. According to this article, 356 people have been exonerated due to DNA in the U.S., 20 from death row. The Innocence Project in New York, the biggest project in the country, reports that 75% of its cases were closed due to lost or destroyed evidence. That's a pretty high figure. Despite the reliability of DNA evidence in post-conviction cases, criminal justice officials strongly oppose a statutory duty to preserve physical evidence, citing it's too costly. Well, here's a question for you to consider. Here's my reaction to that. What happens when that very evidence proves that the person in prison is innocent? The state has had to pay for that person's incarceration and often has to pay for compensation for that person as well. So we are talking about thousands and thousands and sometimes millions of dollars. Is that cost effective? So that's a question to think about, isn't it? 76% of all crimes, I didn't know this, are property crimes with no biological evidence. Only 1% of all crimes are rape and sexual assault crimes requiring a small amount of space for evidence. And we also know that 18% of rape kits are sitting on shelves, never having been tested. And 14% of homicide cases have evidence that is untested. So I certainly hope that you have gotten some background information on all of this. I found it very interesting to discover these things that I hadn't known before. I did want to talk about the impact of prison on children, but we're going to have a guest in the next few podcasts who will talk about the impact of prison on Derrick's family. I think we often forget that the family is sentenced along with the person who goes to prison. They serve a sentence too in their own way. So we certainly will address that. So I hope that you will stay with us for this series of podcasts about the Derrick Williams case, which took place here in Bradenton. And as I often want you to do is to please write to me at pursuing.justice5@gmail.com. I would love your reactions to the podcast. I would love suggestions. And if there is someone out there who would like to tell his or her story, that would be wonderful. Please write to me, and I promise you I will write back to you and see if we can work something out. So I hope to hear from you out there, my listeners, and we'll see you next time on Pursuing Justice. Thanks for listening.